Okay, we're back again. The Birth of Tragedy by Friedrich Nietzsche, Part 4. I'm on page 44. The plastic artist, as also the epic poet, who is related to him, is sunk in the pure contemplation of pictures. The Dionysian musician is without any picture, himself just primordial pain in the primordial re-echoing thereof. The lyric genius is conscious of a world of pictures and symbols, growing out a state of mystical self-abnegation and oneness, which has coloring, causality, velocity quite different from that of the world of the plastic artist and the epic poet. While the latter lives in these pictures, and only in them, with joyful satisfaction, and never grows tired of contemplating them with love, even in their minutest characters, while even the picture of the angry Achilles is to him but a picture, the angry expression of which he enjoys with the dream joy of in appearance, so that by this mirror of appearance he is guarded against the being unified and blending with his figures. The pictures of the lyrist, on the other hand, are nothing but his very self, and as it were, only different projections of himself, on account of which he has the moving center of this world, is entitled to say I. Only, of course, this self is not the same as that of the waking, the waking, empirically real man, and the only verily existent and eternal self resting at the basis of things, by means of the images whereof the lyric genius sees through even to this basis of things. Now let us suppose that he beholds himself also among these images as non-genius, his subject, the whole throng of subjective passions and impulses of the will directed to a definite object, which appears real to him. If now it seems as if the lyric genius and the allied non-genius were one, and as if the former spoke the little word I of his own accord, this appearance will no longer be able to lead us astray, as it certainly led those astray who designated the lyrist as a subjective poet. In truth, Achilles, the passionately inflamed, loving and hating man, is but a vision of the genius, who by this time is no longer Achilles, but a genius of the world, who expresses primordial pain symbolically in the figure of the man Archilochus, while the subject, willing and desiring man, Archilochus, can never at the same time be a poet. It is by no means necessary, however, that the lyrist should see nothing but the phenomenon of the man Archilochus before him as a reflection of eternal being. And tragedy shows how far the visionary world of the lyrist may depart from this phenomenon, of which, of course, is most intimately related. Who did not shut his eyes to the difficulty presented by the lyrist in the philosophical contemplation of art, though he had found a way out of it, on which, however, I cannot accompany him, while he alone, in his profound metaphysics of music, held in his hands the means whereby this difficulty could be definitely removed, as I believed I have removed it here in this spirit, and to his honor. In contrast to our view, he describes the peculiar nature of song as follows. It is the subject of the will, his own volition, which fills the consciousness of the singer, often as an unbound and satisfied desire, joy, but still more often as a restricted desire, grief, always as an emotion, a passion, or an agitated frame of mind. Besides this, however, and along with it, by the sight of surrounding nature, the singer becomes conscious of himself as a subject of a pure willless knowing, the unbroken, blissful peace which now appears, in contrast to the stress of desire, which is always restricted and always needy. The feeling of this contrast, this alienation, is really what the song as a whole expresses, and what principally constitute the lyrical state of mind. In it, pure knowing comes to us as it were to deliver us from desire and the stress thereof. We follow, but only for an instant, for desire. The remembrance of personal ends tears us anew from peaceful contemplation, yet ever again the next beautiful surrounding in which the pure, willless knowledge presents itself to us allures us away from the desire. Therefore in song, in the lyrical mood, desire, world as will, and idea, the personal interest of the ends, the pure perception of the surrounding which itself presents, are wondering mingled with each other. Connections between them are sought for and imagined. The subjective disposition, the affection of the will, imparts its own hue to the contemplating surrounding, and conversely, the surroundings communicate the reflex of the color to the will. The true song is the expression of the whole of this mingled and divided state of mind. Who could fail to see in this description that lyric poetry is here characterized as an imperfectly attained art, which seldom and only as it were in leaps arrives at its goals, indeed as a semi-art, the essence of which is said to consist in this, that desire and pure contemplation, the unesthetic, the aesthetic condition, are wonderfully mingled with each other. We maintain rather that this entire antithesis, according to which, as according to some standard of value, Schopenhauer too still classifies the art, the antithesis between the subjective and the objective, is quite out of place in aesthetics, inasmuch as the subject, the desiring individual who furthers his own egoistic ends, can be conceived only as the adversary, not as the origin of art. In so far as the subject is the artist, however, he has already been released from the individual will, and has become, as it were, the medium through which the one verily existent subject celebrates his redemption in appearance. For this one thing must above all be clear to us, to our humiliation and exaltation, that the entire comedy of art is not at all performed, say, for our betterment and culture, that we are just as little the true authors of this art world. Rather, we may assume, with regard to ourselves, that it is true author, us as pictures and artistic projections, that we have our highest dignity in our significance as works of art. For only as an aesthetic phenomenon is existence and the world eternally justified, while of course our consciousness of this, our specific significance, hardly differs from the kind of consciousness which the soldiers painted on canvas before the battle represented thereon. Hence, all our knowledge of art is at bottom quite illusory, because as knowing persons, we are not one and identical with the being who, as the sole author and spectator of this comedy of art, prepares a perpetual entertainment for himself. Only insofar as the genius in the act of artistic production coalesces with this primordial artist of the world, does he get a glimpse of the eternal presence of art. For in this state he is, in a marvelous manner, like the weird picture of the fairy tale, which can at will turn its eyes and behold itself. He is now at once subject and object, at once poet, actor, and spectator. With reference to Archilochus, it has been established by critical research that he introduced the folk song into literature. An account thereof deserved, according to the general estimate of the Greeks, his unique position alongside Homer for what is the proper popular folk song in contrast to the holy Apollonian epos. What else but the perpetuum vestigium of a union of the Apollonian and the Dionysian? Its enormous diffusion among all peoples, still further enhanced by ever new bursts, testifies to the power of this artistic double impulse of nature, which leaves its vestiges in popular song in like manner as the orgiastic movements of a people perpetuate themselves into its music. Indeed, one might also furnish historical proofs that every period which is highly productive in popular songs has been most violently stirred by Dionysian currents, which we must always regard as the substratum and prerequisite of the popular song. First of all, however, we regard the popular song as the musical mirror of the world, as the original melody, which now seeks for itself a parallel dream phenomenon and expresses it in poetry. Melody is therefore primary and universal, and as such may admit of several objectivations in several texts. Likewise, in the naive estimation of the people, it is regarded as by far the more important and necessary. Melody generates the poem out of itself by ever-recurring process. The strophic form of the popular song points to the same phenomenon, which I always behold with astonishment, till at last I found this explanation. Anyone who, in accordance with this theory, examines a collection of popular songs will find innumerable instances of the perpetually productive melody scattering picture sparks all around, which in their variegation, their abrupt change, their mad precipitance, manifest a power quite unknown to the epic appearance and its steady flow. From a point of view of the epos, this unequal and irregular pictorial world of lyric poetry must be simply condemned, and the solemn epic rhapsodies of the Apollonian festivals of the age have certainly done so. Accordingly, we observe that in the poetizing of the popular song, language is strained to its utmost to imitate music, and hence a new world of poetry begins with the Archilochus, which is fundamentally opposed to the Homeric. And in saying this, we have pointed out the only possible relation between poetry and music, between word and tone. The word, the picture, the concept here seeks an expression analogous to music, and now experiences in itself the power of music. In this sense, we may discriminate between two main currents in the history of the language of the people, according to their language imitated either the world of phenomenon and of pictures or the world of music. One has only to reflect seriously on the linguistic difference with regard to color, syntaxical structure, and vocabulary in Homer and Pindar, in order to comprehend the significance of this contrast. Indeed, it becomes palpably clear to us that in a period between Homer and Pindar, the orgiastic flute tones of Olympus must have sounded forth, which in age as late as Aristotle, when music was infinitely more developed, transported people to drunken enthusiasm, which, when their influence was first felt, undoubtedly incited all the poetic means of expression of contemporaneous man to imitation. I here call attention to a familiar phenomenon of our own times, against which our aesthetic raises many objections. We again and again have occasion to observe how a symphony of Beethoven compels the individual hearers to use figurative speech through the appearance presented by a collocation of the different pictorial world generated by a piece of music may be never so fantastically diversified and even contradictory. To practice its small wit on such compositions and to overlook phenomenon which is certainly worth explaining is quite in keeping with the aesthetics. Indeed, if the tone poet has spoken in pictures concerning a composition, when, for instance, he designates a certain symphony as the pastoral symphony or passage therein, the scene by the brook, or another as the merry gathering of rustics, these are likewise only symbolic representations born out of music, and not perhaps the imitated objects of music, representations which can give us no information whatever concerning the Dionysian content of music, and which in fact have no distinctive value in their own alongside of their own other pictorial expressions. This process of discharge of music in pictures we now have to transfer to some youthful, linguistically productive people to get a notion as to how the strophic popular song originates and how the entire faculty of speech is simulated by this new principle of imitation of music. If, therefore, we may regard lyric poetry as the effulgeration of music in pictures and concepts, we can now ask, how does music appear in the mirror of symbolism and conception? Appears as will, taking the word in the Chopinian sense as the antithesis of the aesthetic, purely contemplative and passive frame of mind. Here, however, we must discriminate as sharply as possible between the concept of essentiality and the concept of phenomenality. For music, according to its essence, cannot be will, because as such it would have to be wholly banished from the domain of art, for the will is the unaesthetic in itself. Yet appears as will. For in order to express the phenomenon of music in pictures, the lyrist requires all the stirrings of passions, from the whispering of infant desire to the roaring of madness. Under the impulse to speak of music in Apollonian symbols, he conceives of all nature and himself therein only as the eternally willing, desiring, longing existence. But in so far as he interprets music by means of pictures, he himself rests in the quiet calm of Apollonian contemplation. However, much all around him, which he beholds through the medium of music, is in a state of confused and violent motion. Indeed, when he beholds himself through this medium, his own image appears to him in a state of unsatisfied feeling. His own willing, longing, moaning, and rejoicing are to him symbols by which he interprets music. Such is the phenomenon of the lyrist. As Apollonian genius, he interprets music through the image of the will, while he himself, completely released from the activity of the will, is pure, undimmed eye of the day.